Welcome to What's the Point? I'm Bill Ellis. Each week I talk with people about the moments that shape them, the choices that change them, and what those stories might spark in you. So with that said, let's get into today's conversation. Hi, and welcome to What's the Point? I'm Bill Ellis, and this is where we sit with people who've worked out what drives them and how they've learned to live it with intention. Today we're joined by someone who blends science, humanity, and leadership in a way that gets straight to the core of how people show up. Dr. Jaime Goff is a leadership coach, psychotherapist by training, former college dean, and the author of the book, The Secure Leader. Her work explores how our early emotional patterns shape how we trust, relate, and lead. After years in academia and later a senior leadership role in a major healthcare system, she recently made a deliberate shift back into full self-employment, choosing a path that supports her well-being and amplifies the work that brings her joy. We'll talk about the patterns that shape us, the choices that free us, and what it means to build a life that aligns with your purpose rather than draining it. Jaime, welcome.
Thank you, Bill. I'm excited to be here.
I'm excited to have you, so thank you very much. When people come across your work for the first time, what is it that you hope that they feel?
I hope they feel hopeful. I think that sometimes when people encounter my work, because, I am talking about some of the things that really shape us from our past experiences and our early childhood. I think maybe initially people might think, oh, is it even possible to change this? It's so deeply embedded in who I
Mhm.
am. And what I want them to hear from my work is that, yes, you can. And there is hope, and we all have the ability to change no matter where you are in life, no matter your age, your experience. There's
Yes.
always the possibility for change.
That's fantastic, and it's very exciting. But before we get into a deeper dive into your work and the science behind it, and there is science behind it, what's something early in your life that helped shape the way you see people?
Yeah. I talk about this a little bit in the book, but, I grew up in a very kind of blue collar environment, very blue collar, very, highly conservative, religiously conservative. And so some of the messages that I received as a kid, not in a intentionally mean or restrictive way, right? But the messages that I received growing up, particularly around emotional expression, were that, you know, as a child and especially as a female child, you're to be seen and not heard. And that emotional expressiveness is not to be shared. And so I very much learned that I needed to stifle my emotion and to hide it, to be quiet and to not be seen as much as possible in order to, kind of survive and really
Uh,
thrive in that type of environment. And the way that impacted me as I, was growing up and forming my own relationships as an adult, and then I think as a leader, is that I had these biases against people who were very emotionally expressive because the messages that were embedded in my brain were that that's wrong and there's, something wrong with you if you can't control yourself emotionally. And so I had to really look at that in myself and make some adjustments and really tackle those biases and deconstruct that so that I could meet people where they were. And so I could also learn the strength and
yeah.
the, positive aspects of emotional
Yeah.
expressiveness. So that's, kind of one example from my own experience
Yeah.
that has shaped who I became.
So, so just to build on that a little bit, when you think about that younger version of yourself, I mean, you were curious, you were observant, you were trying to figure people out, and
Mhm.
yet you had these constraints. But beyond the constraints, or maybe due to the constraints, what do you think that young girl was trying to figure out? What do you think she was trying to discover and understand?
Yeah, and you point out I was curious and observant, and I think that's always, something that have big characteristics for me. I think I was really trying to figure out whether or not people could be trusted, right? Because what I did see with emotion, because what I did observe was that if you were emotionally expressive, you often were punished for that. or it was criticized or judged. And so that was really deep within me. And so I think as I grew and again, as I was establishing my own relationships, there's always that testing, right? Like, okay, this was not necessarily safe to do when I was a child. Is it safe to do now? Can I do
Hmm.
this? As I grew and I learned that, inhibiting myself emotionally in the way that I was probably wasn't healthy and wasn't good for me. Then it took some work on my part to be able to do that more effectively, to figure out who I could trust and when it was okay to do that.
Well, let's explore that a little bit
Yeah.
because, you've built your work around identity, yours and others, identity and connection and trust, and we're starting to get an idea of where that
Yeah.
maybe started. But when did that interest start to feel personal rather than academic? Or did it feel personal and
Yeah,
then
I
academic?
I I think it always I think it always felt personal, and then what the academic side did is it gave me a framework
Uh-huh.
to understand the personal experience. So I would say it was first personal, but then became academic, and then in some ways became personal again.
Okay.
And what I mean by that is, I had these experiences early in my life. And then as I became educated and went to school and got my PhD and kind of learned some different theories and explanatory frameworks, I started to understand what I had experienced in a
Uh-huh.
different way as a result of that. And at first I approached it from a distance, right? Like, okay, is this, seems to be making sense, but it's always hard to apply those things to yourself initially.
Yeah.
But then it just became so clear, and so then I kind of started to, on the flip side of things, apply a lot of those frameworks to my own experience as an adult and adult relationships and in
Mhm.
myself as a leader too.
Yeah. So we're going to dive deeper into that in just a little bit, but just kind of as a teaser, maybe I find it very interesting that it did start personal and went academic, and then the cautious approach that you
Mhm.
took, that we all take, to kind of looking back and saying, "Huh, does what I went through, is it validated or not?" And that becomes part of, I think, the key to what you opened up about to start our conversation, Jamie, that we can change.
Mhm.
But it's not always easy, but we'll
No.
get to that in just a minute
Yeah.
because what I wanna touch on now is your life in academia.
Mhm.
So you're the dean of a college, and share with us your journey through academia.
Yeah. So my PhD is in couple and family therapy. And actually this work in the book, I think started to percolate, if you will, back when I was a PhD student at Michigan
Uh-huh.
State University. And during that time, I was on a research team. Look, we were focused on infant mental health. And infants, the definition of infant is under the age of 2. And so we were focused on infant mental health. I was on a team of therapists who were working to reunify mothers with their infants. Those infants had been removed from the home. The goal was reunification, so typically it wasn't for severe abuse, severe neglect, but there
Right.
was, there was some concern there. So these infants had been removed from their home, and most of these mothers were very, very young, and they didn't have good models themselves for how to be an effective parent. And my job was to help them learn how to do that, learn
Uh-huh.
how to attune to their baby, understand their baby's communication and what they were trying to, get them to see, learn how to play and to be present and connect to establish a secure relationship with their infant. So that was my first kind of introduction to attachment theory. I was also involved on the research side where we were doing some analysis of some playing, like that we set up play scenarios for children, and I was involved in doing some analysis of that. And then later on in my career, after I became a professor, a university professor, I really started to specialize in working with couples. And what I discovered is that a lot of the same dynamics around connection
More.
and security that were present between those mothers and their babies, I was really trying to cultivate with them, were also present between intimate partners, romantic partners. And so I
Mhm.
used an attachment based therapeutic approach in my work with couples. And then later on, when I moved into a leadership role, I, had become a department chair and I was an associate dean. And then, like you mentioned, I eventually
Mhm.
became the dean of a college at a university. that's when I started to really look at leadership because I became a leader myself. And again, I started to make some observations that leadership and teams, how leaders relate to their teams, was also similar in terms of some of the
Yeah.
dynamics I was seeing, and in terms of the responsibility of a leader to provide some level of security and safety for their teams to be able to flourish and to be
Yeah.
their best selves.
So what seems very simple as you talk about it, but it does take some time to start to, I'll say, connect the dots, is to see the core similarities
Mhm.
between relationships, be it parent-child, be it worker, coworker, boss, whatever the case might be it couples. But it all comes down to what I believe is that all of us, whether we're aware of it or not, are seeking a secure attachment.
Mhm.
And that secure attachment sounds to be at the root of what you do.
Yeah.
So you were on obviously a very clear upward trajectory in the world of academia, and then something shifted. What did shift your sense of direction from saying, okay, academia has been nice, however?
Yeah. Yeah. And, I did enjoy my time in academia, but I'm also, you mentioned I'm curious and I'm a learner. That's my, if you're familiar with the strengths finder, learner is my number one strength. So I'm one of these people who every, 5 or 6 years just starts to get a little bit of an itch to do something a little different, learn something new, challenge myself in a new way. And that's where I found myself as I was thinking about my next steps and staying on the kind of administrative path in academia. Just for whatever reason at that time didn't appeal to me. I had, done that and been very successful. But what I was really finding a lot of joy and purpose in at that point was the work I was doing with other
Mhm.
academic leaders through some of the institutes at the university. And then I had also had some opportunity to work with, I worked at a Christian university, so I'd also had opportunity to work with church leaders and to kind of
Uh-huh.
go in and do some workshops for them around leadership. And I was just finding at that time in my life that it was really filling my cup. And I loved that and got so much joy out of it. So that's when I decided, like, I'm going to invest myself into
Yeah.
this type of work full time. So at that point, I, went back to school, got a certificate in executive coaching, left the university, and then I worked in the healthcare system, as you know, for about 6.5 years as their director of leadership development, doing quite a bit of internal coaching and developing leadership programs for them. And now, just of the past like 6 weeks or so, I'm back out on my own, really
Yeah.
investing in my own clients and the
Good.
work I'm doing.
So again, I'm fascinated by your willingness and ability to jump from one thing to the next and follow your instinct because that's one of the reasons that we do this show. And one of the
Mhm.
reasons that rather than just focusing on accomplishments, we try to pull the curtain back and see what's the thing behind the thing.
Yeah.
And in your case, you just gave an example of being in a leadership role at a university and being quite accomplished at it. However, it wasn't fueling you.
Mhm.
And so most of the listeners are not, and myself, are never going to be the president of a university. And I was lucky to get in one and get out of one. So I'm never going to be a leader. But it did, what sparked me is the number of times that I see and work with people who are in a position that are similar to what drives them, but not exactly the
Yeah.
same. So the one example I'll give, and then I'll quit talking, is, people that are excellent in sales at saying, you need something, we've got the value to fill your need, are often successful and are often promoted into sales managership. So at university, you were in basically administrative role,
Mhm.
and your drive, what fueled you, was in the actual work as opposed to the administration. You were
Yeah.
good at it, but it didn't. So that's what I'd like our listeners to take note of, if nothing else in this show.
Yeah.
You can find what drives you, and we'll talk more about that.
And
And that leads to I'm sorry.
I was just gonna say, can I add something about
Of course
that?
you can.
Yeah, because honestly, I felt at that time kind of restless, and initially I wasn't sure exactly what the next step was going to be. I just
Mhm.
knew that I wasn't feeling fulfilled with what I was doing at the time. So it wasn't something I came to entirely on my own, right? I think we come to these things many times in community. So
Hmm.
I started talking to mentors and friends who knew me well and asking them, like, what do you think I'm really good at? Where do you see me shine? Because I was trying to really pinpoint what my next step was going to be.
Hmm.
And I also read several books to help me with that. Erminia
Yes.
Ibarra's book, Working Identity, was a key for me during that time because it helped me kind of explore different ideas. So it wasn't like, oh, this is what I'm going to do and this is exactly what I want to do
Yeah.
next. I did have to take some time to explore that in community with other people.
And that's a great addition. Thank you for sharing that
Mhm.
because, there does come a point when we realize that the life we're building doesn't match what our insides are. I'll
Mhm.
put it that way. And it's not an instant, oh, I shouldn't be doing this, I should be doing that. It's not that at all. But again, I encourage listeners to say if you're feeling uneasy at all about what you're doing and how your life is, I'm not suggesting you just jump into something different, but listen to what Jamie just said, how she did it. She knew something wasn't clicking,
Mhm.
and she took the time to research and explore and find that right thing. So when you did that, you stepped away from the career ladder, and what surprised you most about what you really wanted?
The consistency of it. Because and what I mean by that is that what I discovered I really wanted, it wasn't an entirely different thing. It still played on the strengths I already knew I had.
Mm.
But I was just thinking about how to use those strengths in a different way in relationship with people. And so going again, all the way back to that experience as a doctoral student and working with mothers and children. And that was one of the things I looked back and I said, oh, all that's when I really started to see like all of these things are connected and are bringing me to this point. Everything I've learned, even if it seems like it's an entirely different like area or discipline, can be applied to what I'm doing now.
Over.
And, and also I think what surprised me, and I would say this especially about my time at Christus Health, is that the people there could really see the value in just the skills that I brought, even though I had really no experience, right? And my
Right.
resume did not show any experience as, a director of leadership development or any experience in talent development or HR or OD at all.
Enough.
But they were able to see, and this is maybe where if you're kind of on the hiring side of things, they were able to see like how all of the experiences I had, and I could communicate that effectively too, that those experiences were absolutely relevant and the skills that I brought to the table were relevant, even if the context was a little bit different.
Uh-huh. And that's a key point, looking for what we know and what our skills are and how we can apply them to something that's more fulfilling.
Yeah.
So when you decided to reinvent your career, I'll say, or to transition your career, whatever, however you'd like to say it, and you kind of touched on this, but what drew you to that leap?
I think, yeah, it was just, I really spent some time thinking about what I loved doing, like what was bringing me the most joy in my current role. So when I was in my role as a dean, where was I finding the most joy? And like I mentioned, it was in doing, I was doing some workshops at our Center for Teaching and Learning around leadership for up and coming leaders. I was going into churches and doing some work with leadership teams there. And then I decided as well, I was like, well, this is interesting. I'm liking this. Let me to try to build my own thing. So I went to my boss at the time and said, hey, I'm really interested in this leadership stuff. Can I develop a program for alumni and I was particularly interested in women at that time. Can I develop a program for female alumni, like a women's leadership program? And just kind of do it as an extracurricular type of thing and offer it, here at the university. And they were like, yeah, absolutely. That sounds like a great idea. So I tried to find opportunities where I could explore that even more. And then,
Mhm.
so I did that and I was like, I love this so much. I absolutely want to do this. So I did some testing, right? So I was looking at what brings me joy and then let me try to build something myself to really do some additional testing and experimentation around this. And then kind of after doing that, I was like, yeah, this is where I am right now.
Yeah.
And again, I also had a really trusted friend and colleague who kind of spoke into me as well around what she saw as my strengths and my purpose.
Yeah. And that's a great example of, the way I look at it quite often and work with people on is identify what our skills are,
Mhm.
identify what really excites us there, brings us joy, as you say, and where those intersect,
Mhm.
then the question is, does it pass the so what test?
Yeah.
So does our skill and our drive matter to anyone?
Mhm.
Is there value? So those are kind of the things to look at. When you were doing that, when you were going through this, Jamie, how much, if any, were you aware of applying it to yourself and changing that little girl who was very restricted yet curious? And it sounds like you thrived being able to be curious unhindered.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, and I found ways even as a child to be curious, right? So I spent a lot of time like in the woods as a kid, like hunting down, not like hunting and killing, but like hunting down. I didn't have weapons, little animals, whatever little animals I could find. And I'd like capture them and keep them in boxes and watch them for, so I always found ways to really kind of feed that curiosity in me. But yeah. And I think that and some of that kind of awareness and insight started coming earlier, when I was first stepping into leadership roles. Like when I first became a department chair, I was seeing how some of the patterns from my early experiences shaped how I was showing up with as a leader with those that I worked with. And, one of the things also, because another message I got a lot was like perfection was really important, right? And rewarded. So I was also, a perfectionist as a child, straight A student, never broke rules, always got everything right. And I think that developed like this like need to be in control and hold really tightly to things because I needed to make sure everything in my life was perfect. And when I first became a leader, a department chair, I remember I had an administrative assistant for the first time. And after, I don't know, a couple of months during like a one-on-one or something, she finally said to me, Jamie, you have got to let me do my job. Because I was not allowing her to do her job. I was
And
so controlling, that I wouldn't give her access to my calendar. I really didn't let her like take charge of planning the various events and things like that. Like I always had to do everything. And she was like, what am I here? Like, what am I here for? You
yeah,
have to let me do my job. And so that was one of the first times I really had some insight for myself to say, oh, wait a minute. This is probably linked to my dominant attachment style and really started to reflect on that.
Mm.
So that's when that first kind of really started to come into my awareness that all of this was connected
no.
to leadership.
You just mentioned something that struck me, and that is it entered into your awareness. Part of the key to that is being open enough take things into our awareness without judging what's coming in, but assessing it instead. Saying, gee, I wonder if there's any truth to that. And
Yeah.
it sounds like your administrative assistant did you a huge favor
She
and
did.
that you were very willing to risk. So you moved into coaching.
Hmm.
And, speaking of, life's not just all rosy. You're in the middle of reinventing yourself.
Hmm.
Along the way, there were setbacks, and you showed tremendous resilience. But as soon as you went into coaching, shortly after, you hit kind of a major setback.
I did.
Share with us what that's all about.
Uh, it's kind of embarrassing as I look back on it in some ways. Yes, so after I left the university, started my own business, right? Like I'm going to start this coaching business and things were going, well. I was just getting the business launched. I don't know, about a year or so in, maybe not even quite a year. I don't remember exactly the timing on it, but I had an accident. And why I say I'm embarrassed is because it was at a boot camp and we were doing relay races. And one leg of the relay races was to run backwards. I don't know why they had us be doing that, but whatever. But when it was my turn, we were all online on our teams. When it was my turn, I look over to see who I was going up against, and it was this much younger woman. She might have been like a late teen, like 19, 20, much, much younger. And I was like, I'm going to beat her. I did not beat her.
Huh.
Instead, as I'm running backwards, I lost my balance and fell and broke both of my wrists at the same time, which, I mean, that's not a terrible life-threatening accident, but when it comes to your ability to function and, just kind of live your life, it's really, you can't do much. So I was really knocked off my progress because, there were so many things I couldn't do. I was all casted up. I couldn't really type. That was really challenging. I couldn't drive. I couldn't feed. I mean, there were a lot of things I was not able to do during that recovery period. And it really slowed down my progress.
Goodness.
And in addition to that, at the time I got hit with a lot of surprise medical bills that were significant. And so I was kind of staring down this like, oh, all of these massive bills, plus I haven't been able to focus on building my business and kind of keeping things going. So that's when I decided, okay, I need to take a little detour here just, for, stability and for my family's well-being. Probably need to try to find a full-time job. So that's when I started applying to jobs, and that's ultimately how I ended up at Christus, which honestly was a great thing. So it was a detour, but at the same time, I learned so much during my time at Christus Health and the opportunities that I had to learn and grow and contribute there that I'm incredibly thankful for it. And now I'm back out on my own again. But I think now I'm set up for success in a different way because of the experience that I had there. So that detour was actually really helpful.
What a great example of resilience rather than quitting. Resilience, you were knocked pretty hard. And I started smiling so much when you were explaining it because my thought was, I bet you really wanted that administrative assistant back. Typing and stuff.
Exactly. I couldn't afford her. I couldn't have afforded her yet.
Yeah. But facing a setback like that, it's easy for people to throw in the towel, just to say, okay, that's it. This wasn't meant to be. Rather than doing that, you sat back and probably had a lot of downtime, probably had, I'm assuming, had a lot of questions of what the heck is going on? What do I do? But rather than throwing in the towel, you said, I just need to take a detour. And you took a detour that taught you a lot and introduced you to a lot of things that you didn't have before. And I would want to highlight that for the listener. That's what I want anyone listening to understand that. I was in a conversation a week or so ago with people about resilience. And I'm of an age that I can remember this. There was a little plastic toy thing years ago, and it was called a Weeble. And their line was, Weebles wobble, but they don't fall down. And when we're able to do that, or even get back up when we do fall down and break both wrists, it leads us on a path of improvement and growth. So speaking of that, when you got back to, quote, your purpose by taking a detour.
Yeah.
And now recently you are choosing, after that you chose a new chapter again, which was getting back into your business. And so now you're on your own, you're an author, you have all of this experience. What does this, I'll call it, season of your life feel like?
Really energizing. So I'm very energized. Like I said, it's been not even 2 months yet since I stepped away from my full-time role at Christus. But it's really energizing, exciting. I'm filled with gratitude, and you said like Christus was a detour, but the thing about it was that I was still able to fulfill my purpose in that role, but in different ways than maybe I had initially imagined. And it actually opened my eyes to different possibilities for that too. So I think, just in terms of what it feels like, deep gratitude, energy, excitement, kind of, not confusion, but maybe just I'm still seeking some clarity around like exactly what's next for me. Do I want to, there are all the things you think about, right? Start a podcast, get started on book number 2. All of the kind of possibilities out there are really exciting. So that will be kind of my next, really what I'm focusing on over the next couple of months is where do I want to focus my energy initially here as I'm getting this business started and back off the ground again.
Great answer, great plan. So you just talked about your business alignment. How is right now your work and your health and your relationships and your purpose? How are all those aligning for you right now? And you touched on this, but let me just add a corollary to the
Yeah.
question. What's giving you energy these days? So you build on what you already said, please.
Yeah. I'm I think what's really giving me energy and what's really exciting, I mean, the response to the book has been incredibly positive, and so that's giving me a lot of energy because I don't know if I shared this one with you when we talked before, but I first started thinking about this book over a decade ago when I was still in higher education.
Right.
I have notebooks. I would keep notebooks where I would write ideas for books, research, that type of thing. And I wrote the idea for this book down over a decade ago. But at the time, it was the third thing you mentioned, like, do people need this right now, right? Like, that's also something you have to consider. Does this meet a need? And at the time, I started kind of putting some feelers out about that to see, might people be interested in this? Will it resonate? And it was like crickets. No one cared. I put some blog articles out, some social media posts, no comments, no interaction. And so I was like, okay, maybe now's not the time. So I set it aside for a while, but it just still always there for me. And so I just waited. And then, a couple years ago when I was to think about like what was going to be my next step, I thought maybe it's time to get back to this book because I was seeing some of the shifts in the workplace after COVID. So I was like, let me put some feelers out and see if this might resonate with people now. And the response was entirely different. People were interested. I got a lot of interaction, a lot of responses from that. And then now that I've written the book and released it in September, I've been getting a lot of really positive feedback from it. So the opportunity, what's giving me joy, I love sharing the message. I've been able to do a number of, workshops and, speaking engagements, on the book, anywhere from like I spent two entire days with, one leadership team at a bank, which was so fun to just dive deep into it,
Nice.
to all the way to just, the 45-minute kind of conference presentation. But
Yeah.
sharing the work and seeing that it's impacting people and making a difference has been really rewarding. And again, I'm just incredibly grateful for it.
Outstanding. So the book is The Secure Leader.
Yes.
And we touched on that earlier that the book is a blend of science and a blend of lived experience. And you've just shared quite a bit of lived experience and a lot of science that you investigated, learned, and added into the whole equation. But if someone knew nothing about attachment or emotional patterns or any of the work you do,
Yeah.
how would you explain what it is and why it matters?
Yeah. I think the easiest way to describe attachment theory is that it is based on the premise that the fundamental need for humans is connection, and secure connection specifically. That is our fundamental need from the time we come kicking and screaming into this world, and it never goes away. Sometimes we think, oh, we don't need security and safety as adults. No, you absolutely do. That need continues throughout our lives. And how that shows up for us is that, again, when we're very young, I think there are two fundamental questions related to that sense of security. The first question is, am I worthy? So we start learning very early on in our lives, or developing a belief about our own worth as humans based on how our caregivers respond to us or don't respond to us, whether their responses are developmentally appropriate, whether they are responses that tell us we're safe or we're unsafe. So we start learning a lot about our own worth. The second question is, are others trustworthy? And again, based on those early experiences, can I count on people to show up for me when I need them? When I'm in distress, when I'm afraid, are people going to be there for me? And so those two questions really inform how we go about our relationships throughout our lives. And we're always asking them. It's not something we're asking up here in our prefrontal cortex, right? It's not something that we're
Yes.
consciously asking, but we're always filtering our experiences through those two questions. And
Yeah.
how we answer them then determines, in a lot of ways, how we show up in our relationships and how we show up as leaders.
So the experience we have as infants, which you described as under 2 years,
Hmm.
as a dad and a grandfather, twin 14-year-olds and an infant, a 13-month-old boy, all of that catches my attention and makes me wonder, what does that mean for parents of kids that age? And just to touch on, you talked about looking back and we can make changes and that kind of thing. I can look now and say, I would have done things differently
Oh,
as
of
a
course.
father years ago. What can I do now as a grandfather, and how can I do that without intruding on the parents
Yeah,
themselves?
yeah.
What can the lesson be for people listening that are parents of that age or know people that are?
Yeah. One caveat related to that is that, you kind of have secure and insecure attachment styles that we develop early on in our lives. They tend to be fairly consistent, although, again, they do change. But even what research shows, and this comes from Harvard, what research shows is that even parents who do a really great job providing safety and security for their infants and who do establish secure attachment relationship with their infants, they still miss their infants' cues 80% of the time. 80% of the time. We are not good as humans. Our social awareness, we want to talk about it in emotional intelligence terms, our social awareness is not the greatest, right? We miss cues all the time. The distinguishing factor between parents who establish secure relationships and those who end up with insecure relationships, and then they have children with insecure attachment styles, the distinguishing factor is repair. It's repair. So if you miss a cue, are you aware enough that you notice, like, oh, I was busy, I
Somewhat.
was distracted, I missed that, and then do you notice that and do you repair it? Do you
Uh-huh.
apologize? Do you then go and, make that child feel safe and feel seen
What?
and feel heard? So repair is probably the most important skill that in relationships we
Yeah.
can develop because we're just not very good and always
Yeah.
being attuned to other people. So that's, I think, the number one thing is just to, because I
That's
think sometimes parents think, oh, I have to be perfect all the time. No, absolutely not, because none of us are, and in fact, most of
yeah.
us are not.
Yeah. And in fairness to all parents,
Yeah,
myself, you, everyone
yeah.
included, there's not really an instruction manual. We don't go to
Mm-mm.
university and study being a parent. So a lot of what we do is based on how we were raised.
Yep.
And we all do, I believe, the best we can
Mm-hmm.
with what we have when
Yes.
we have to do it.
Yeah.
So, yeah, it's something that I just want to make sure that parents understand that none of us,
Yeah.
as Jamie just said, are perfect, but we can work on being more aware. And
Mm-hmm.
and let me segue from my grandson to a work environment where
Yeah.
you say the key is repair. So
Mm.
how do those how do those learnings, how does that relationship building and creating secure attachment
Mm-hmm.
work in the workplace?
Yeah. So secure leaders, they are those, they'd probably, if you're familiar with like other leadership theories and styles, they would probably most closely resemble like transformational and servant leadership, right? Secure leaders are those who they're not threatened by the skill of their team members. They really want to invest in the growth and development of the people who report to them. They know them they take the time to get to know
Uh,
them on a personal level so that they can have that connection. They know what their strengths are and their capabilities and work to connect them to work that really capitalizes on those things. Secure leaders are also those who are the first to admit their own mistakes, and they share that openly and share what they learn when they're making those mistakes. And because of that, they create those psychologically safe environments where if a team member makes a mistake, they're not gonna try to hide it. They're gonna bring it to the leader and say, listen, I made this mistake. Let's problem solve around this together, right? Because they know that leader is not going to judge them and criticize them and get angry at them for doing so. So they create those environments of innovation and, reasonable risk taking. And yeah, so and the other thing is that secure leaders, they know how to balance empathy and accountability. Being a secure leader doesn't mean you're soft and nice. Well, you're nice, but it doesn't mean you're soft and that you don't have expectations and that you just let people do whatever they want and don't hold them to high standards. That's not the case at all. Secure leaders they do have high expectations, but they know how to inspire people to those high expectations. They give real feedback so that it's possible for people to grow if they're not meeting the mark, but they always do it in a compassionate way. So it's
Yeah.
not an either or. Secure leaders are really able to bring those two things together, empathy and accountability.
And it's a great answer and a well-painted picture of a secure leader. My question is, how does someone become a secure leader? And I suspect the first answer is to read your book called The Secure Leader. The second one might be to contact you and get some workshops going. But in your experience, really, what does tend to unlock something meaningful for a leader?
Yeah.
How do we continue to grow and build and expand our ability to be a secure leader?
Yeah. I think the first step is always self-awareness. And so, really being honest with yourself, seeking feedback from people who will be honest with you about where your gaps are and what they see in terms of some of the things maybe that you're doing that might be creating some insecurity. So self-awareness. And if people, if they're like, am I a secure leader or am I displaying some insecure patterns? I have a free little assessment on my website that they can go and take to get some insight around that. So once you have identified maybe where some of the gaps are and where you might be showing up in insecure ways, whether anxious or avoidant, then you can take some steps to start identifying where you need to grow. And typically after that self-awareness, most of us need to work on our self-regulation. So it begins with the self-awareness, working on your own self-regulation, because many times, when we get angry or frustrated and we take that out on other people in the workplace, it's because we're not regulating our own emotional experience effectively. And we need to get better at understanding what our triggers are, what the strategies for self-regulation, the strategies that work best for us that we can utilize on a regular basis. And that takes a lot of work. It takes practice and building habits, because honestly, we are walking around in an environment right now that is designed to dysregulate us. And so becoming more regulated so that you can maintain a sense of calm and you can interact with people from a place of calm and thoughtfulness and intentionality instead out of a place of reactivity, which is when things aren't going well between leaders and teams. It's often because leaders are reacting rather than being proactive and regulated in the way that they interact. So those are a couple of things to start with. And there are a lot of strategies that you can use to build your self-regulation capabilities that I talk about in the book. And you can find, you don't have to even, buy my book. You can probably, just Google and find some good ideas for doing that as well.
Yeah, I think a lot of people will take the easy way out and use AI or ChatGPT or some form, and the caution there is, it's not like they're the expert. They
Right.
just pull whatever they can on the internet. Not everything on the internet is as validated
Right.
as your study and your experience. So just a word of caution there. So the key, starting point for a secure leader, as I understand what you just said, self-awareness is being open to looking at ourselves
Yes.
and asking, are we able to create a place of secure connection? And are we secure in ourselves? I heard a phrase a while back that I loved, and it's, can I have enough humility to be honest? In other words, can I get my ego out of the way to listen to things? And that's not easy to do. That's one of the many things that's an ongoing process. It's not a snap of the fingers
Yeah.
and the light goes off, but we do have to start with that. We've put this in large measure in the context of a work environment,
Hmm.
but leadership is in work, it's in life, it's
Right.
all over. So when you look about, when you think about a full life, not just a full calendar, what
Hmm.
does that look like for you?
Hmm. A full life in terms of with regard to work, it's the opportunity and the privilege to do work that I love that brings me purpose and joy. It is deep relationships and deep connections with those that I love. So my husband, my friends and family. It is time to reset and reconnect with what's important to me. It's time for leisure, honestly. Time for leisure, time to be outside, to hike, to do some of the things I enjoy doing, building Legos and, walking my dog. And, just that's what life well lived looks like for me.
Good.
Work that I
So
love, deep
what
connection,
I'm
and time to reset.
what I'm taking from that is the answer is however we do it individually, whether we like Legos or not,
Yeah.
is to find a way to ground ourselves and to get back to clarity of
Yeah.
what it is we want in life, what it is we pursue in life, and kind of put the noise aside, kind of get that out of the way. How do moving back into your professional hat, do you have advice, excuse me, or how do you see someone listening, how can they start paying more attention to the parts of life that actually make them feel like themselves? What's your advice there?
I think that first is really knowing what that is. Right. And so, spending, like I was mentioning, when I was restless and not really feeling connected to what I was doing. So, spending some time in self reflection, and it's not necessarily work related, right? There may be things that you need to build into your life where you find joy, or you have found joy and purpose and connection in the past that you've let go because of busyness and time demands and all of those types of things. And so making sure that spending some time reflecting and identifying what's really missing
Mhm.
that will help you feel more fulfilled. And then one of the best pieces of advice that I ever got when I was a young leader, I had a mentor that I would meet with, on like a monthly basis. And one of the things that, I learned early on in my conversations with him was that I am not the hero. The world does not rise or fall based on what I do and whether or not I'm available 24/7, or it doesn't rise or fall on whether or not I work myself to death. And that learning was really powerful for me because really, truly and honestly, throughout my career, I am I have had because of that, I've established really good boundaries. And I think that's leaders often think that they are the hero and that everything hinges on them, and it doesn't. That it
So,
very, very rarely does. And are only hurting yourself and the people that you work with if that is the
yeah.
belief that drives you.
Yeah. So you you've already stated several times that what people are really looking for when you boil it down is secure attachment, a
Mhm.
trusted, secure attachment. And the fact that a lot of our belief, behavior, personality, whatever you want to call it, started early in life. So taking all of that into account, is there something you used to believe about yourself
Mm.
and about purpose that you see differently now?
Mhm. Yeah, I think it goes back to that belief around control that I mentioned earlier. I mean, I really did used to be an extreme, like early in my career when I was first getting started. I used to be an extreme perfectionist, extremely controlling, didn't really see how other people could add value to what I was doing or to my own success, right? I was like, it's all about me and it's all about what I do. And that's something that thankfully through, experience, mentoring, coaching, I have entirely shifted. And I often share this, but like when I was at Christus, I led a team of about 5 people. And one of my biggest points of pride was that if I went on vacation and I came back, my inbox honestly was never very full. And that
And
to me was a sign that I had empowered my team. I had managed my team up to the rest of the organization so effectively that when I was out, people listened when it said on my out of office to contact this person in my absence, and they
yes.
did. And by the time I got back, it was taken care of. That to me was a huge success. And that was very different from how I started my career, where,
Yeah.
I would not have really trusted other people to take care of things.
So a lot of people, a lot of us, I'll include myself there, often feel pulled but unsure. We want meaning, but we don't know where to begin. So before I ask you to share your thoughts on that, I want to go back to what you said about early in your career, how you were completely micromanaging your administrative
Mhm.
assistant, and compare that to the example you just gave of leading that team where they were completely empowered, which is definitely secure attachment both ways, and it has to be both
Yeah.
ways. So, so back to that person or people who are kind of unsure. What's your advice to them?
Unsure of what their purpose is. Is that?
Unsure of their purpose,
Mhm.
unsure of just not. Let me switch it up. Those people that don't feel that they are in a situation of secure attachment.
Uh,
Let's put it that way.
Yeah.
How can they move more into secure attachment, be it work-wise, be it
Yeah.
personal, just as a human being?
hmm You know, secure attachment is interesting because it's paradoxical. And what I mean by that is that to have true security, there's a tension between safety and risk, and you have to have
Uh-huh.
both. You can't be secure if you only have safety, but you never take risks because you don't really know if that person or, will accept you if you make a mistake, right? And you have to know that they're going to accept you in spite of mistakes in order to truly be secure. So it's
Yeah.
that you have to have both that safety and risk. So if you're someone who's wanting to become more secure, think about that tension in your life and the relationships that you have. And it starts with you. So think about how you first can provide that to others,
Mm.
right? How can I provide both safety and, how can I let people know that I accept them regardless of what mistakes they might make so that they can feel that tension between safety and risk and
Mhm.
experience true security? So, what does that look like for me? And
Mhm.
both in my personal and in my professional relationships. What does that look like in terms of how I respond when someone messes up or when someone fails or doesn't meet a goal? I can respond in a way that will make them feel insecure, and I can respond in a way that will help them feel more security. So start with
Mhm.
how you are providing that to others, and it will start coming back to you.
Excellent answer. So, Jamie, thank you for your time. We're running up against the amount of time that I asked for. You so graciously gifted us. We talked about your journey through academia, your leadership, your your breaking both wrists, the injury, reinvention, resiliency, emotional patterns that shape how we show up in the world. Before we finish, there's one more question I want to ask you, and it's the question I ask every guest. And it's very simply, Jaime, from your perspective, what's the point?
The point is security, at the risk of sounding like a broken record. But I really do think that the point of our lives as humans is to experience connection with others in a secure way, where we feel accepted for who we are at any moment, and where we provide that to others as well.
Terrific. So everyone listening, you've just heard Jaime's answer to what's the point, but now the question is, what's your answer to what's the point? Ask yourself that. Also, if someone comes to mind, someone whose story that you believe, this is to the listeners and to you, Jaime, as well. If you know of someone whose story could really help us bring our message of finding purpose and attachment in life, we'd love to hear from you. Send me an email, hit me up on social media, go to the website. All of my contact information is in the show notes, as is all of Dr. Jaime Goff's contact information. And I encourage you to reach out to her website and take the assessment that she has on her website. It's very interesting. I've done it. You get the answer immediately. And look for the book, The Secure Leader, because I guarantee that will help us, whether it's a business perspective or personal. So Jaime, again, thank you so much for your time, and thank you for sharing your incredible knowledge and experience.
Thanks for listening to What's the Point? If this conversation meant something to you, we hope you'll follow the show and share it with someone who might also benefit from it. And if you know a guest with a story worth exploring, send me a message, bill@billellis.com. I'd love to hear from you, and I look forward to seeing you next time.